Brandon Sanderson is a well-established author, particularly in the fantasy genre. One of the core elements to a fantasy setting is usually the magic that is used throughout the world. Time and again, Sanderson has been able to introduce readers to new magic systems. Sanderson's technique is so established, in fact, that it can almost be written into a formula to follow for other aspiring writers who want to write in the genre. Though the formula can be implemented into any situation where something foreign to the reader is introduced, not just a system of magic. The Mistborn series will be analysed and utilised as the example of the technique Sanderson used to do this. The first book of the series, The Final Empire, will be the primary piece that will be covered. This is the first book of the series, and it is particularly important that Sanderson carefully reveals the system of magic he will rely on, because not only does the reader need to understand how the magic system works in the novel, it is equally important that the reader recognizes the formula for the reveal. By the end of the novel, the reader has a substantial understanding of the magic system known as allomancy, the process of consuming metals and absorbing them to perform magical tasks such as pulling and pushing on metal, affecting people's emotions and physical strength, but also of what to expect from Sanderson in the rest of the series with regard to picking up the sometimes very subtle techniques of the formula for revealing the system. In the prologue, terms are used that don't mean anything to the reader, such as the word allomantic, and this may confuse the reader. This is exemplified again when the character refers to having metal in his stomach. This informs the readers of the presence of an unfamiliar circumstance, which immediately requires the creation of a new mental model for the world in which the story takes place. This is all introduced by a character named Kelsier, who is familiar with the powers and magic of the world and how to properly utilize them, so his vocabulary is understandably different from the reader. Vocabulary is the first component of the formula. This system is familiar to at least this character, and probably for quite some time, as the vocabulary he uses is part of Kelsier's lexicon. The full extent of the power of the magic is not yet demonstrated though, to invoke a sense of wonder and anticipation within the reader. In the first chapter, the protagonist, Vin, is unaware of the true extent of her power and doesn't fully understand it. She has named it something not used by any other, simply describing it by saying she used her luck on Laird. Vin's description of the effect of the magic on others is vague. She pressed against Laird's emotions, dampening them. He became less suspicious, less afraid, docile. His worries melted away, and Vin could see a calm sense of control begin to assert itself in his eyes. And this alerts the reader again to the first component of the formula, the language of the system. The descriptions of the power of the magic are clearly those of someone who is trying to explain a phenomenon they don't fully understand. The key is the lack of the lexicon of Kelsier, who is an expert in the magic, compared with the everyday language Vin shares with the reader, providing them with additional insight into the protagonist's state of mind. This is all Vin has to communicate her perceptions of the concept, and it is this language link with the reader that provides the bridge by which the reader begins to cross into the world of Kelsier to eventually experience complete understanding of the system of magic. Vin is the author's vessel, a character that learns about the system at the same time as the reader. This part of the formula is crucial, as it allows the readers to have a clearer link between language and the effect of the magic. This will later enable readers to easily link the terms used in the prologue to the magic system. We then see the character, Kelsier, observing Vin. He is using the unfamiliar terminology to discuss her with someone, linking Vin's abilities with the main magic used in the world. She's at least a misting. This is used to show a character familiar with the magic system discussing a character who is not. This creates the link between the character who uses terminology that the reader is more likely to understand to the currently confusing terms used by the experienced character. We then go back to the protagonist's point of view, who sees Kelsier as sort of an overwhelmingly powerful force. His actions are explained as though he is a god through Vin's eyes, as she described the scene. Camon's angry demands were cut off as he was thrown backward as if he had been punched by a powerful force. His arm was ripped free from Vin's shoulder, and he toppled to the ground, causing the floorboards to shake. We then use Vin's terminology to explain Kelsier's actions on her, linking the two forms of magic we had seen so far together by saying, someone had just used luck on her. This experience is to show Vin's clear confusion and awe at Kelsier's power, representing the audience's initial confusion at the magic system. Vin as a protagonist is used to be the link the audience has to the world, as they learn about the magic system almost identically. The readers then see Vin's interest in knowing more about her power from Kelsier when the novel says, "He claims to have killed an Inquisitor," Vin thought, and he used luck. I have to stay, if just long enough to find out what he knows. This gives reason later for Vin to ask about the powers. It again reinforces Vin as a vessel in which the audience will learn about the powers, as they are just as interested as she is. Through Vin, the readers are then introduced to Kelsier's crew, and the third component of the system, the social hierarchy. Each of the main crew are different Mistings. Basically, a Misting has one of the powers in allomancy, while a Mistborn has all of them. This gives Sanderson the opportunity for each character to explain their powers individually rather than just having Kelsier, a Mistborn, explain them all in a large expository way. Each of the different types of Misting powers has a label attached to the power and a particular type of metal that they require to use said powers. These details are revealed through plot lines, generally during conversations between characters. However, there is also a chart at the back of the book. These labels allow readers to differentiate the various abilities more easily, rather than just referring to all of them as a Misting. In video games, popular RPGs have a class-based system, where a particular class has specific abilities and skills. Readers who are already familiar with this system will be able to easily adapt the terminology and have a better understanding of the class differences between the characters. The training of Vin by Kelsier is another plot point through which the audience develops their understanding of the full extent of the magic system. Its concepts are introduced to the reader gradually and factually by a person who has near mastered the techniques, and its explanations are clear and intuitive. The magic system itself is considerably less outlandish compared to other magic systems. There are clear restrictions on the capabilities of the magic, and this is the fifth component of the formula. Basically, if a person were to push a bit of metal against something that weighs more than them, they would instead be pushed away. Comparatively, if a person were to pull on something that weighs more than them, they would instead be pulled towards it. These restrictions ensure that the magic is not able to render the user unstoppable, so as to still hold a level of tension when a character with the power is in conflict with someone without it. It also allows for more interesting uses of the system. For example, instead of being able to fly, Kelsier demonstrates that by repeatedly throwing a coin on the ground below him, he is able to push himself up into the air and, at the right angle, forward. This allows him, with enough coins, to essentially hop through the air, this world's closest thing to flying. In essence, the process of Sanderson's technique is to show a glimpse of someone who is skilled in the system to give the reader an understanding at the power without fully comprehending it. Then introduce the reader to a character who has some elements of the magic system, but does not see them as such, and instead has created their own, more relatable terms and descriptions of what happens, so that the reader can relate to and better understand the process. After this, show the experienced character describing the protagonist's powers as similar to theirs, creating a link between them for the reader to understand. Then, show the protagonist observing the experienced character in a light that is similar to how the reader saw them initially, to give them a reason to want to understand more. Utilize other characters who are specialized in particular areas of the magic system, so that the process of explanation doesn't feel like a wall of text, but rather also offers interesting characters to resonate with. This is then followed by the experienced character teaching the protagonist, and by extension the reader, how the system works, and more importantly, how to exploit it to its maximum potential. So essentially, the components are 1. The language of the system. 2. The informed character or characters. 3. The social hierarchy of the system. 4. Plot points support delivery of system details. 5. Clear limitations of the magic. With the process being 1. Confuse the reader with terms that they are unfamiliar with. 2. Provide a vessel, a character that learns about the system at the same time as the reader. 3. Have the vessel use their own, more basic terms to describe the system so that the reader can more easily grasp it. 4. Have the vessel meet someone who is experienced in the system and describes their traits using the confusing terminology, creating a link between the relatable terms of the vessel to the system of the story. And remember that it is better to split up this explanation across multiple characters who are specialized in particular areas of the system so that the conversation is not just one big exposition. In the novel, there is another system that is introduced throughout, Furukumi. This provides a repeat of the process for the reader to ensure their understanding of it. While similar to allomancy, it does have differences. This system is introduced later in the novel, once readers have an understanding of allomancy. The character who is trained in Furukumi knows about allomancy and uses terms similar to explain how Furukumi works. This is possible because Sanderson has already taught the terms and capabilities of allomancy to the reader, so they will be able to easily transfer said information and terms to learn about this new system. This is representative of Sanderson's technique as a whole, as the character who explains Furukumi, a concept that reader is currently unfamiliar with, uses the terms associated with allomancy, a system that the reader now has a better understanding of. Furukumi is explained in far less time, and primarily from one character. The fact that Sanderson is able to introduce another magic system later in the novel in a much briefer way is indicative of the technique being effective at educating readers. The technique is quite malleable, depending on how difficult the concept is that the writer is trying to introduce. This technique does not have to be used solely for the introduction of foreign magic systems. This technique and formula can be used to simply introduce foreign concepts that are key to the author's story that a reader may not initially understand. I have used elements of this technique in the beginning of my novel that I have begun to write. It is set in a fantasy setting where there are other species that are similar to humans. Without outright stating the form of the main character, I have put in elements that the reader may find initially confusing, before they realize that this is clearly not a human that is being discussed. The protagonist is currently referred to as No Name, another indication that something is different about this character to an ordinary person. Later, someone insults the protagonist by calling him Demon Child, alluding the audience to what the protagonist might be. No Name will later be talking about his appearance from his perspective, in a way that is relatable to readers. It will sound more like the character is complaining about how they look, rather than that they are a different species. This is exemplified when he complains about the shape of his nose and the way his hair falls. At this point in time, as No Name is quite young, he is not entirely sure what he is and what made him the way he is. Later in the novel, a character who is familiar with No Name's species will see him and tell him what he is and why people are cruel towards him. After this, the character will teach No Name of his abilities and advantages of being a part of the species, and the readers will learn more of what No Name is at the same time. However, the most important part of the technique is the use of the vessel character. Without the vessel character, readers would simply be subject to walls of explanation and confusing terms. The point of the vessel is to provide an easier access point to the system. The use of simple terms, such as Vin's referral to her power as luck, is key. In my novel, the vessel uses the term itch to describe strange thoughts he can't control, which are later revealed to be the ability to read minds. This offers a small amount of the system to be explored with terms that the reader can more easily translate. Once the reader grasps this, they are then at the same level as the vessel in terms of understanding. By incrementally transferring the information the reader already knows to the magic system, they are more likely to grasp the concepts. Had the protagonist started the book already knowing how everything works, there'd be little reason for them to explain the magic system throughout the book, creating a confusing read and a less enjoyable experience overall. Another step that is quite useful for more forms of writing is the idea of splitting up the magic system and associating different elements with different characters. This is done in the Final Empire with the different mistings that the reader becomes familiar with. In my novel, the vessel will meet other members of his species, as well as some that are a part of another species that was created in the same fashion as his own. By providing a character to represent a particular power, readers have another way to connect powers with terms. This is further implemented with the use of the nicknames associated with each individual power, so that a character can refer to someone as one of them and the reader being instantly familiar with their abilities. The names of the different species will be what distinguishes power and abilities in my novel. The idea of introducing readers to a concept that they are unfamiliar with can be daunting. If the reader is unable to grasp the concept, the overall experience will be negatively affected. Similarly, If they are told all the details of the concept in one large expository manner, it will be difficult for them to translate that information into the rest of the novel. Brandon Sanderson's technique of introducing foreign concepts to a reader is easily translatable into other writers' novels and should be utilized whenever possible. By following the steps outlined in this essay, any writer should be able to utilize Sanderson's technique in their own work.